Hello, welcome to the first AI and Games talk we've managed to hold at the University of Derby this year. This is actually the third one we've given thus far this year. We were actually at Eurogamer in Birmingham, and we were at Game City last week, so it's kind of nice to finally come back and do one of the kind of nice case study ones back at the University of Derby. And this is called the definition of artificial insanity. Now, I've got the obligatory who am I part, but we'll kind of skip through this pretty quickly. Most of you know who I am. I'm Tommy Thompson. I'm a lecturer in computer science based here at the university, and I like to do a bunch of AI research, and I run this web series called AI and Games and blah, 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 blah. There is not a video running when it should be. That is concerning. But anyway, and so what this talks about is we've done several of these over the period that we try to kind of deconstruct existing video games and talk about how they work. And this time we're actually going to talk about a very particular series of games and how a certain type of AI application has occurred to kind of turn this franchise into something that was actually worth playing. Now, as is kind of the part and parcel of doing these talks, there's a lot of academic babble. I'm going to start using terminologies that are perhaps not familiar to all of you, perhaps maybe except to the final year students who are currently in the middle of their AI class, but we'll try and kind of fight through that and explain it to you in as plain English as possible. So this is about Far Cry, and Far Cry, for those of you who perhaps don't remember that well, actually started back in 2004. It's a first-person shooter series that was originally developed by Crytek. And it starred this main character called Jack Carver, and you're trapped on an island, you're trapped out in Micronesia, if I remember right. And it was pretty ridiculous. It was all involving genetic modification and super soldiers and secret bases in volcanoes. And so the plot of Crisis, almost, just 3 years in advance. Now, the thing is, it had this idea of open world gameplay, but it never actually kind of made good on that promise. Far Cry is actually not an open world game, despite their sort of presumption, or at least the selling point that it was open world. It wasn't. It was actually just very finely crafted, albeit very broad, kind of very linear experiences. Now, in 2007, the series kind of picked up again with Far Cry 2, and at this point, actually, the publisher, who was Ubisoft, took control of the property and moved it to Ubisoft Montreal. And Far Cry 2 was the first attempt at what you would now consider not just the Far Cry blueprint, but also sort of the Ubisoft blueprint. If you think about much of their current intellectual property these days, whether it's Far Cry, whether it's Assassin's Creed, and even like upcoming games like The Division, where you had this giant open world and you were trying to achieve a whole number of tasks within it. Now, Far Cry 2 was kind of worked, but also it was a bit of a flawed bit of work. It was not very good, actually. Did anybody play Far Cry 2? Like, keep your hands up if you liked it. Like, okay, so only about 10% of you. I really tried to like Far Cry 2. The thing is that I realized that I liked the idea of it more than I did the actual game. And some of this is just due to the fact that they had this, what they called systemic gameplay, where they started trying to build all these small aspects of the game's design that are kind of interesting on their own, but when you kind of bring them all together, it kind of explodes into this massive amount of kind of fun and interesting, like, kind of opportunities that you can have as part of that world. The thing was that they didn't constrain it very well, and as a result, it was just sort of this really annoying mishmash of different game mechanics that could happen at once. And it was very frustrating. Things like your vehicle would break down every 5 minutes because someone shot at it and you'd have to get back out and repair it. So, of course, you'd wipe out all the guys that did it at the checkpoint, but you drive back past the same checkpoint 10 minutes later. It's fully repopulated with bad guys. They damage your engine again. Oh, and my gun would jam 3 times during the firefight, so I'd barely get out the firefight, have to repair the vehicle for the 12th time, and 20 minutes later, that guard base would still be once again full of characters. And this was all based, if I remember right, Far Cry 2 is based in Africa. So it was on the right path, but it didn't quite work out as intended. And what happened then was the subsequent transition into the games that we're actually really going to talk about in this piece, which is Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4. And to give you a kind of an idea of what that's all about, we've put together a little video to get it started, and let's hope upon hope it actually works.
Each doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again. expecting shit to change. That is crazy. The first time somebody told me that, I don't know if they were bullshitting, so boom, I showed them. The thing is, okay, he was right. And then I started seeing everywhere I looked, all these fucking pricks, everywhere I looked, doing the exact same fucking thing, over and over and over and over and over again, thinking, this time is going to be different. No, please. This time is going to be different. I'm sorry. I don't like the way you are looking. Okay? You have a fucking problem in your head. You think I'm bullshitting you? You think I'm lying? Fuck you! Okay? Fuck you! It's okay, man. I'm gonna chill, man. I'm gonna chill. The thing is, alright? The thing is, I killed you once already. And it's not like I am fucking crazy. It's okay. It's like what I'm really rich. Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Yeah, that wasn't my finest moment right at the end there. So, what we just showed there, that video is a combination of footage that comes from Far Cry 3 as well as Far Cry 4. Now, Far Cry 3, the introduction, the bit at the start, the kind of crazy guy, that's Vaz, who's the antagonist of Far Cry 3. And there's something kind of ironic about it, that he's talking about the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting it to change. Yet, Far Cry is a game about doing essentially the same thing over and over again and hoping that the experience will be different with every subsequent release they made. Now, Far Cry 3 is the big shift in terms of how this franchise worked. They decided to go back to basics with Far Cry 2, scrubbed the whole thing and spent 4 years making Far Cry 3. And what they tried to do was they really wanted to focus on this systemic gameplay element. That crazy stuff can happen, that you want to have a crazy gameplay experience, and it kind of makes that open world more interesting. Now, part of that was what they wanted to do was actually make the actual world itself not that realistic. They wanted to make it more crazy, more over the top, more ridiculous. But they still suffered from this issue of trying to have it work within a linear story mode that they're going to have. So Vaz is like the kind of chief antagonist for the majority of the game, and you're trying to hunt him down and get revenge against him because, spoilers, he kills your brother in the first 20 minutes of the game. Now, it's interesting because I saw a talk where they were actually discussing the issues of trying to build Far Cry 3, and one of the things that they said was, well, one of the biggest problems was around that point in time in 2012, Call of Duty was essentially in its sort of the peak of its storytelling ability. You can infer from that what you will, but the market was all about linear, explosive campaigns, but they didn't want that. They said, right, we're going to have this kind of explosive kind of campaign that's happening while you've got this really interesting world to explore, and the game really kind of struggles to kind of bring those two things together, because ultimately, dicking about in Far Cry 3 is usually far more interesting than actually playing the story mode. Now, they followed this up, which is quite impressive in some respects. Far Cry 4 was made by the same dev team 2 years later. It took them 4 years to go from 2 to 3, and 2 years to go from 3 to 4. Bearing in mind that this was also being targeted against next-gen systems. But one of the reasons they were able to pull that off was they used the Far Cry 3 recipe and then tried to fix all the mistakes that were inherent within it and try and add in a few new things. So what we're going to really talk about today is how those things all come together and what particular aspects of this design, this recipe, if you will, that they have, how do all these things come together and why does it make for a really interesting experience? And largely, it's AI-driven. So to get things moving, what I want to do is I'm going to continue to talk and explain how all these systems work, but I'm going to need some help in playing the game because we've got Far Cry 4 currently running on an Xbox One. So who wants to come down first and give us a hand? Who'd already said that they were going to help me? Michael, come on. Bring Michael down one of our final years. I'm going to now prepare the devices so we can get this going. Welcome to the world of Kirat. This is a very, very large, expansive map. And you're welcome to explore this in any way you want. The only thing I'm going to ask you not to do is do any of the Golden Path missions or any mission that has a capital letter on it. These are actually story mode missions. But you can see all these question marks suggest that there's lots of different things you can explore in the world, and there's also things such as loot chests, what is this? There's survival quests, outpost master quests. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. Do whatever you like. Just... By the way, the Y stick's inverted. I swear, every time we do one of these talks, this becomes an issue. You feel free to change it. Every talk, I think I'm the only... How many people use inverted Y? No one? One? Are you just there to stick up for me? You're just like... You and me are now firm friends. The rest of you are dead to me. All right, so go and do whatever you like. Now, in order to actually get all this working, so the Far Cry recipe, as it were, particularly in Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4, it actually contains a lot of individual components. Like I said, it's systemic gameplay. So when you have all these different individual components that work well enough and they respond to one another, it can build this kind of crazy experience. So what you're really wanting here is that if these systemic components are all together, and you provide them in this kind of large world. So much of this is down to the mechanics available to the player. As you can see right now, we can drive around in vehicles. We're throwing grenades out of the car. You've just been spotted. Someone might attack you. But there's all these different characters going on, and you can drive these vehicles. You can use a wingsuit in the fourth one to fly around an awful lot. And this is all just a little bit nuts. Yeah, you might want to get out of the car. I think you're just going to do yourself an injury at this rate. But also this open world. Now, this open world allows for us to then place so many of these interesting aspects into the gameplay event and scenario, and then kind of really just kind of construct something fun around the player. the ultimate quest for Far Cry 4 in particular, and I'll talk a little bit about how this happens in Far Cry 4, because they have these experiences that can occur, is they wanted to create what they called an anecdote factory. No one's going to play the game and go, oh yeah, what story missions did I complete? Instead, what they're going to do is talk about how I was driving around in a Jeep and I started chasing a truck and shooting it with explosives. Because I'm a bit stupid like that. But it's a fun and kind of interesting experience to tell people. And I started killing civilians. Well done, man. Well done. But yeah, so the game's actually more about the cool stuff that can happen as a result of just being in that game world, rather than the kind of boring and somewhat linear narrative. Now, the ingredients needed for this recipe to work. First of all, we need a player who's doing a wonderful job at the moment. Now we need the player because that's kind of obvious. You need to be part of that gameplay experience. But the systems in Far Cry do pay attention to what the player's doing. Next up, you've actually got all the enemy AI. So all the non-player characters, the bad guys that you're going to try and fight against, the bad guys you want to try and kill. But it's not just them. And as you can see on the other side of the screen, I also talk about the wildlife. So in both Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4, there's a large number of animals running around in the environment which will happily attack you or anybody else who gets in your way. Lions, tigers, bears, cheetahs, rhinoceros, if I remember right, in the fourth one. Now, you've also got friendly AI, because the story in each of them... Now, the thing is that Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4 tell distinctly unique narratives, which seem to both revolve around one American dude fighting against a terrorist force. And so... Help him! Bit late. Jeez. I can already see that doing this as part of the talk is going to prove to be a disaster. So we've got the friendly AI systems. All these cooperative characters are trying to fight and help you against your struggle, whether in Far Cry 3 it's against Vaas, or in Far Cry 4 where it's Pagan Min and his kind of evil dictatorship regime that's taken over Kyrat. Oh, for the love of God. There's also things just like toys, the ability to drive a Jeep off a cliff, the ability to jump off a cliff and then use your wingsuit and fly a couple of miles across the map. But largely there's the encounter system. This is the point you were supposed to use the wingsuit. You were so close, you were so close. But also that there's the encounter system, and we actually saw a little bit of that earlier on, where suddenly this truck full of ammunition is driving along the same road as Michael was, but yeah, I think you took it out? You blew it up, there you go. But it places these sort of things into the game world and says, do you want to do this? This would be kind of fun, wouldn't it? And it's up to you whether you do it or not, but we're going to talk a little bit about how that works. So, every aspect of the AI is designed, it's not some sort of tech showcase to show off this amazing AI technique, because a lot of what they actually do here is very simple, bottom-up approach to, well, really everything. Every character is very simple. It's actually built using very basic techniques, but they're designed so that they are very reactive. So when you place all of these different things into a larger area, when they begin to react off one another, you get this interesting emergent gameplay. So when you've got, say, the player runs into an area where there's 5 soldiers, but a rhinoceros walks in. The rhinoceros is probably going to feel a little bit concerned because there's all these people around. The bad guys will instinctively shoot at the rhino because, holy shit, it's a rhino. And then you suddenly are caught in this circumstance where you're trying to take out the enemies to take over a base, but 2 rhinoceros are now beginning to roll over and just mow down everybody in the area, including you. You go, okay, cool, fair enough. So the actual AI is driven by what you call a finite state machine. Now, I've brought finite state machines up a couple of times in the series. We talked about it a lot during the Batman Arkham talk I gave last year, and also specifically in the Fear series as well, because Fear is quite reliant upon finite state machines. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, this has proven to be a glorious failure. You're already beginning to see everything I'm kind of talking about with this game happening right in front of you as, stop using the sniper rifle, what's wrong with you? Are we good? Are we going to keep going? You feeling good? All right.
You're going to cut out the bits where I'm bad.
No, they're all staying in. I'm going to cut out the bits that I'm bad. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what a finite state machine is, FSMs are this really simple structure where you have particular states, and in each state, we dictate a particular type of behavior that's going to take place. And what we then have is, when you're in this particular state, continue to operate whatever behavior you're doing. So in some cases, this might be a navigation thing. I want you to be going to this particular location, so whenever you're still in that state, you continue to navigate towards that particular location. However, you will then have an event, and events will occur from within the game world, which will then say, right, you need to stop what you're doing and transition into a completely different state and start doing something different. Now, the reason that finite state machines are really useful in this sense is that if you have all these different AI systems all running off finite state machines, you can have the basic structure of what to do in what context, but how they do it is unique. So the big, heavier soldiers who are wearing a lot of body armor and perhaps wielding things like flamethrowers will do the same things differently as, say, a scout who's only wearing a light amount of armor. But subsequently, this can then be adapted to the friendly non-player characters and even the animals. Because all we're saying is, well, go there, attack that thing, run away from this, go over there. And, well, just depending on what type of character it is, you can then change how that actually occurs. And this is quite useful, because one of the other things that's there, beyond reacting to the player, so they'll say when the player is in proximity, stop whatever it is you're doing and try and kill them. But also, if anything else is in vicinity that isn't friendly to you, you better deal with it. You better react to that and attack it, which is kind of neat, and it comes in really handy. And part of that is because they have this environmental model that allows for kind of really interesting interactions to take place as a result of each character. So, for example, when you go into these kind of densely kind of populated areas that have buildings and structures, they have cover positions for the friendly and enemy soldiers. So the soldiers know, oh, this is an area that I can actually do something with. I can go to cover here. There's maybe an opportunity for me to knock something over, and I can hide behind it, and then I can have some sort of suppressing fire while another character begins to come around and try and attack you. It also allows for, sometimes there's an emergent piece of gameplay that can only occur if the system behind it, the larger AI system, gives it a bit of a nudge. So, for example, in both Far Cry 3 and 4, you'll find outposts. They are the red flags on your map, by the way. And what happens with outposts is sometimes you'll find that it's a kind of built-up area, buildings, what have you, and there's enemy soldiers in there, and you've got to take them out. But when you're in there, you might spot that there's a tiger stuck in a cage. And you go, oh, look at that. Is there any way that I can, if I got the tiger out of the cage, could I then use that as fodder for these characters? Now, you can do this in a number of ways. But when they're stuck in cages, the cage actually has an AI behavior attached to it. So when you shoot the cage, if you actually shoot the front of the cage, the cage door will break, and an AI bit of code that's embedded in the cage tells whatever's inside it, walk forward and just come outside and have a quick look around. So the tiger will walk out of that cage, have a quick look around and go, oh God, there's a bunch of bad guys, and the tiger will then instinctively try and eat them. So now you've caused chaos. This little bit of emergent gameplay has occurred where you've went, right, I've now let the tiger out, the tiger's attacking everybody, here I come with my bazooka, I'm going to wipe them out. Well, the bazooka might come in handy here, you never know. And so what's happening here is actually something I'm going to bring up in a little bit. This is actually an encounter that's been dynamically injected into the game world. The game actually knows roughly what Michael's trying to do, probably better than he himself, and it also has a heading. It knows roughly what direction he's going, and it's going to actually create that experience for him to go through. But we'll talk about how that works in a little bit. Now, we've got all these really nice individual behaviors, we've got all these nice individual characters which are reactive to one another, and they respond to one another, and that's kind of neat. Now, sometimes it'll have this context system that's operating above it all, and it'll help kind of manage each of the individual characters that are existing in the world, because there's actually only a finite number, which is really interesting when you begin to actually look at how big the map is in each of both Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4. So this reactive behavior is then largely driven by this kind of larger system that's saying, okay, well, maybe you should go and do this for a little while. When you reach these outposts, by default, the enemies are just walking around. They've been told, just patrol the area, just go and have a little look around. but then maybe they see you. They go, well, maybe you should go and attack him. Maybe actually other characters in proximity should start attacking him. Because it sounds like what you've done is you've said, hey, look, the player's over here, and all these enemies start attacking him. They didn't actually do that communication. One of them spotted you, and then the AI system that's observing all these different characters says, okay, right, all of you who are within proximity of this fella, all go and attack the player, because it suggests that communication is taking place. Now, one of the things that they actually did to make this work is that when you're stuck in a circumstance with like 3 or 4 enemy players at once, they actually have a kind of difficulty adjustment. There's a damage director system which is turning down the enemy character's accuracy and also their strength. And also actually the strength sometimes of their rounds. That way, when you get caught in a firefight with maybe 2, 3, 4 people, you don't get wiped out instantly. Because sometimes when you fight one guy on your own, it's quite easy to get killed. But when you're fighting against 3 of them, you're running around an awful lot, and you don't want them to easily be able to pick you off, because it takes the fun out of it. So they decided that it would scale itself. The more characters that there are, sure, we're going to make them a little bit dumber, but strength in numbers will still mean that eventually you'll probably get wiped out unless you're smart enough to try and fight back. The only problem with that, and this is apparently something they're looking at for future Far Cry games, is that it doesn't scale with multiplayer. So in Far Cry 4, for example, you can play this as a 2-player co-op experience, which also makes it a damn sight easier, because they can't seem to interpret what's going to happen with tactical gameplay that's occurring from 2 people. Maybe one person is actually suppressing fire from a higher point, and the other player comes rushing in. But no, they're not going to be able to do that. How are we doing there? That doesn't look, I wouldn't do that. I don't know. I don't know what you're doing, but I don't... Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Now, the world of Far Cry is actually really big. So trying to find a way to kind of put all this together in an interesting way and also manage that experience is very, very difficult. I'm going to let you get up to the top here and do your thing. Right, so what you want to... Have you actually unlocked this tower before?
No.
I think you have. I think I did it already.
All right.
Okay, so have a little look around. This is a really big map, right? It's actually quite a big map, isn't it? A lot of space, a lot of big space. If you then go into the map, if you press the back button and zoom out, you're still roughly in the area that I left you earlier. And everywhere you can see here, so the red towers, these are bell towers that haven't been unlocked. These help us actually open up and expand the map and let us see as more of the world. But as you can see right now, it's currently covered in fog. It's a very, very big map. A lot of space to explore, a lot of weird stuff that can happen within that time frame. Now, I don't know this for certain. I did a little bit of digging around to try and find out, but apparently the landmass in Far Cry 3 is somewhere in the region of 310 square miles. That's pretty big. And Far Cry 4 is essentially meant to be the same amount of space as 3, but the argument that they made was it's going to be more interesting. How do you make that more interesting? Well, I'll get to that. But you've got 310 square miles. You can't have AI characters all over a map that's 310 square miles in size, because otherwise, well, sure, PlayStation 4s, Xbox Ones, you know, these are next-gen consoles. They're not that good. Even your PC master race, you're not going to have a system that's able to scale to having tens of thousands of characters all over a map that's 300 square miles in size. That's just lunacy. It's really stupid. That's actually a resource problem that you're not going to be able to manage. So, how do we actually begin to address that? What happens is that Far Cry uses a director AI. Now, for those of you who've maybe been to a couple of these before, we actually talked about directors for the first time in the Left 4 Dead talk. What did you do? Oh, another truck! What is it with these trucks? They keep appearing everywhere. Now, this uses a director system. So what a director is, if you're not familiar, is that there's actually an AI system that's watching the game as you play it. And what it does is it's trying to find a way to maximize the experience you're having as part of whatever it is you're doing. Now, bearing in mind all this emergent gameplay that can happen, because bad guys appear in certain places, and vehicles appear in certain places, and animals appear in certain places. And then sometimes you end up with this, where you drive down a street and there's some sort of blockade happening. Why on earth is that there? What on earth is going on? So the director is trying to actually directly create this type of experience because it wants to make sure that you're continually involved in the world. Because by default, the world is actually empty and it populates it for you as it's going through the game. So the director is largely responsible for managing all the constraints of the resources. There's a limited number of AI characters in the world. Uh-oh, throw the grenade. There's a limited number of characters in the world. There's a limited number of vehicles as well. And it will aggressively remove content that you're not using. But it will then also, when it thinks it's appropriate, add new content into the game world because it thinks this is a good place to do it. And it thinks it can do it without you noticing that it's actually trying to pull that off. So, to kind of actually point out the scary reality of what really happens and pulling away the hood, as it were, there's no more than 20 enemy characters or even friendly characters in total in the entire map at any point in time. 310 square miles, 12 bad guys, tops. That's it. There's also no more than 20 animals, and it's a combination, it's somewhere between 20 animals is one extreme or 12 non-player characters. That's the only things they can pull off. So you'll find a combination of all these in the map at any one time, but it will never exceed that. That is the hard limit. When there's too many, it won't allow for more of them to be in there than is necessary. And also, it will only actually allow for 2 or 3 different types of vehicles to appear on the map at once. You might see that truck keeps coming back again and again and again. There it was, another truck has appeared on the map, but there'll also be a Jeep, probably lying around somewhere, and maybe one of the little helicopters. But it does try and keep this very tightly constrained. Only a couple of them on the map at any given point in time. Now, the other interesting thing is, like I said, that it's got a very limited number of players that can appear in the map at any given point in time, but they're also within very, very close proximity of the player. Now, I can't remember the exact number, but my understanding was that they will typically be within less than 500 meters of you. So remember, 310 square mile map, wherever you are, and within a tiny proximity of you is stuff. The rest of the world is completely dead. There's nothing happening in this world. Thanks for that. Make sure you save when you're done. So where are we going to go? Have we got a heading? Where do you want to head?
The bridge way to go. Is it supposed to not be?
There you go. What you can do is you can pick a location and then press X, and that'll set a waypoint to it on your map.
Where was the bridge?
You can also press A when you jump out somewhere to deploy your parachute. That was your wingsuit. Okay. That smoke plume means that there's actually an enemy base in that direction. Oh no. This is going to end badly. So notice how from up here there's not actually that much going on. It seems quite peaceful, it seems quite serene. It's probably because there's nobody here. You see the big A button, parachute. Stab him. What are you, Wolverine? It's amazing. So yeah, even at that point there, we jumped off the bell tower, deployed the wingsuit, flew for about 400 or 500 meters. The map was actually quite quiet. The map only got busy again when he got down to a certain level, and it just so happened that he decided to go to, well, an enemy stronghold. Oh God. Let's try that again, shall we? Remember the parachute button this time. You can't knife them in midair. Believe me, I tried. Hey, there you go. There we go. Yeah, this is going to end badly. So all these characters are just actually exhibiting basic patrol patterns, and they won't react to anything until they're given a reason to. Like a bazooka, or a sniper rifle round. There we go. That's a pretty good reason to respond to something. Now, they won't know where the player is at this point in time, but they'll respond to the fact that one, somebody was shot, but two, there was also some sort of, well, there was a bullet, something was fired. Now, they're going to be aware of the fact that you're up to something, and they're going to start converging on this point. But you didn't turn off the alarm, so now they're sending reinforcements. So by triggering this particular alarm, they're able to call more characters into the map. Next time I'm just bringing pre-recorded footage. You guys are too volatile. He's a heavy, watch out for that one. He needs a bazooka. Whoa, that's the stairs. Oh my God. You got 3 coming up on you. Uh-oh. So the ability there to move to cover being driven by the fact that they've got this navigation mesh running underneath it, and rocks actually are clearly denoted as something I can use to get to cover, and it will keep them alive a little bit longer. Bearing in mind that all these characters, they're designed really to die. That's sort of their purpose. So they're just trying to minimize like how quickly they die. They're trying to maximize their lifespan purely to make it more interesting for you. You can do it. Spoke too soon? But anyway. So even in that particular experience that just happened there, so Michael goes in, starts attacking a base. There's only a handful of them in the base at any one point in time. Then there was some reinforcements came in. But think about how many of them were actually there. You think you killed about 4, maybe 5 before the reinforcements turned up. The reinforcements was a jeep that had maybe 3 or 4 people in it. So again, very constrained numbers, but they're trying to make a kind of interesting experience out of it. We're going to try for the bridge this time. You're adamant you're going to do this, aren't you? Watch out for the trees. Oh God. Tree! Anyway. Now, when, for example, earlier on we saw the footage just on being in vehicles a lot, driving around in the car, just kind of riding around on the roads, we were seeing things like roadblocks appearing, or enemies, just enemies being littered about the map. And even the things like trucks. Now this is actually a very Far Cry 4 specific thing, but say in that previous example where we were attacking the base and then we failed, we tried to run. As you're running away, the game realizes how many characters are actually going to be able to keep up with you. Those of them who are not going to be able to make it, perhaps they're not in vehicles, will simply be removed from the world. It takes them out because it goes, right, you're no longer a valuable resource because the player is now maybe best part of a kilometre away from you. You're not going to be able to keep up with them. So instead, what it'll do is it'll actually take them out and it goes, right, can I put them somewhere in front of the player so that as the player's trying to escape, they then caught in this really awkward circumstance where they have to fight back. Stealthy, well done. Nothing says stealthy like just kind of dropping out of... Nice. I'll let you do your thing. That's one way to solve it. Once again, reinforcements called in, very small amount of them. Didn't last very long, clearly, in this particular circumstance. I think you've by and large pulled it off this time. Shouldn't tempt fate. Did you use teabag him? I think you took the alarm out.
Making sure.
What the hell? That guy's still in a Jeep. Behind you, I think. Oh, it's a big guy. That might need a bazooka.
That's definitely stuff.
You should be able to stab him, yeah. There you go. All right. Do us a favour. Want to get in a vehicle and go for a drive?
Yeah.
Not with me in real life. Just realised how dodgy that sounded in hindsight, really.
I can't take it with me.
So, like I said, that you've got this director that's continually trying to manage how many characters are in the scene at once, or how many enemies are in the scene, vehicles, etc., etc. And it's just trying to keep everything around the player at any one point in time. Now, the thing that happened in Far Cry 3 was that they got that to work, but it didn't turn into that interesting an experience. It actually proved, at times, the map would still be a little bit dull. So they tried to deliberately place certain characters in certain locations. One of the things the director would do is periodically create patrolling vehicles. So if you're driving down a particular road, it would say, right, we know that they're heading in that direction, drop a vehicle in there, or even create a roadblock just with two vehicles there. But that was... But even though that they were creating that, it wasn't that dynamic, it wasn't that responsive. So one of the things that Far Cry 4 does is it has this, well, it's a procedural encounter system. So during gameplay, it will decide to just throw random things in there. And so it becomes a bit nuts, because as you're just wandering around, and we've already seen this a little bit today, where you're just driving along, and there's another truck full of ammunition that you can either hijack or blow up. There's even instances where you'll find that there are pockets of the resistance, the Golden Path, who are attacking, who are fighting against pagan Minch soldiers. In fact, you can hear it right now. One of these battles is actually in the middle of taking place, because the game thinks, right, well, this will be an interesting thing to just occur in your periphery. And if you want to explore that, do it. If you don't want to do it, then, that's fine. Go ahead. Now, these range quite a bit. Like I said, that you can have this thing where you've got different soldiers. You can even have things like the Golden Path, like they're driving by and their car breaks down. Like, can you fix my car, please? And it takes 10 seconds out of your day, but you actually get a reward for doing so. They're good guys. I wouldn't shoot them.
I'm out, help them out. They're under attack.
They're under attack. In fact, that is actually something that tends to happen, is the outposts that you've captured will then suffer a counterattack. The game decides, oh, well, you're near this particular outpost. It's only maybe a mile or so away from you. We're going to send in a force of maybe about 10 to 12, remember, non-player characters to try and take the base back. Now, I have no idea what happens if you lose, because I've never lost one of these. But it's kind of frustrating because sometimes, while it works reasonably well, that it's creating this whole thing where it's like, right, here's a base that you've already captured, they're going to try and take it back, you've got to help defend it. Sometimes it will do it in the most ridiculous way possible. What are you doing? Jesus Christ. Oh, I'm hearing this screaming. Now, for example, when I was actually playing this to build the save file up to run this particular day, I captured an outpost. This was about 2 weeks ago. I captured an outpost. I then went into there's like a cabin in each outpost that allows you to replenish all your supplies, and sometimes you can pick up extra missions. I then got in a vehicle, and as I drove away, a counterattack happened. And I'm like, okay. So what happened was I then went back. I took out like 10 to 15 of these bad guys with some success, perhaps not as good as Michael there. Now, I then took out all these bad guys. I managed to take back my particular base. The next thing that happened is I'm beginning to drive away, and 2 of the people that were actually patrolling around the base were attacked by an eagle. So I then killed the eagle. Then I get half a mile up the road, and there was another ammunition truck. As I took the ammunition truck out, a second counterattack happened at the same base. So it has this kind of dynamic event thing, but sometimes it doesn't really pay attention to how ridiculous or how random it's becoming. It's sometimes actually too random, because it will keep asking you to do the same things over and over again that really you shouldn't actually be doing. Now, I'm just going to begin to wrap this up, that everything that's being done here in terms of having these kind of dynamic characters, as well as the ability to have a director system that kind of manages over it, is by and large really what people are doing within most of AAA game development. Some of the more notable examples in recent years, I mean, Far Cry has actually became the template, and there is a lot of work happening in Assassin's Creed, but I'm going to probably talk about Assassin's Creed in the future talk, specifically Unity, which does some really, really interesting innovations, even though the game itself has proven to be open, well, its quality is open to debate. Some of them that do actually come to mind. Elephant. See what I mean? No, I don't think they can swim. I think you're all right. And so that set in action, really, that actually is a nice point to kind of finish it off, where it's like, and you're trying to take over a base, and an elephant attacks, and a rhino attacks, and I wouldn't do that if I were you. It takes a little while to kill them. Oh, God. Okay, never mind. That worked. But yeah, so this is the sort of thing that's becoming increasingly common, that if I have this large open world, can I find AI and characters that are interesting enough in their own regard to go and do something in it? But then, if necessary, do I need to actually find a way to inject them into that to force particular types of gameplay? Now, probably one of the closest successors to Far Cry 3 is actually Saints Row 4. Saints Row, which is these sort of over-the-top interpretation of the Grand Theft Auto model. In the fourth one, you actually play as a superhero, essentially, because you're trapped in a Matrix-like world, and you're able to hack the system, if you will. Now, you're running around in that world, and all this weird and wonderful stuff can happen, but again, it's the AI system trying to find a way to inject things within your proximity to make that gameplay experience fun. Probably the one that sticks out in my mind is Respawn's Titanfall, which is like it's essentially their new version of the Call of Duty model, except you now have giant robots. Now, the thing is, in Titanfall, when you're running around as a human, you are a pilot that can then drop in a robot and bring it into the battlefield. But at any given point in time, there's 6 humans on each team, potentially 6 Titans on each team, but there's around 50 characters in total, because you've got 24 between the two, but then there's also 20 to 30 non-player characters, which represent the infantry on each side of that particular conflict. And so what happens is the game actually is a director that will airdrop non-player characters into the game world around players to make it interesting. And it will find areas that are also of tactical significance for both teams, and drop both their own infantry to support them, but it will drop the enemy infantry in to try and make things a little bit tougher for you. And it's a really, really nice example of how to kind of bring all this together and use AI in an interesting way in a first-person shooter online game, where typically you would never have any AI at all. The last one that comes to mind is actually The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which came out earlier this year. The Witcher uses a thing called spawn trees. So when you're running around in this open world, it will dynamically create these battles between enemy characters and enemy animals and what have you in this world. And so it's a very similar, albeit different approach. For the love of God, they're everywhere. And once again, another random event. The karma events, as they're actually called in Far Cry 4, that's when the procedural encounter system is deciding to interfere and deciding to muck around with you. And at that wonderful point, that's the end of the talk. And you can watch it later when it's on YouTube. It'll be much better. No, seriously, thanks a lot for coming along. I hope you found it interesting. Does anyone want to have a go while we've still got the room booked for the next half an hour?